what is your ideal content cadence and amount for expansion? This is something that I keep an eye on, like the Final Fantasy XIV discussion tab, and I wanted to talk about this week, and obviously with Stormblood on the docket, I didn't know if I was going to get to, but I had it kind of in the back of my head. I had it written down as something we might get to, and I'd love to talk about this. So the Final Fantasy XIV discussion Reddit is a place for people to go post their thoughts, their desires, their feedback. It's one of the places where criticisms of the game regularly get leveraged, and then you get a whole bunch of thoughts on that. It's also a place where you see people saying, I'm loving this. What do people think? What do people speculate? It's a place for people to go speculate about leaks or about upcoming stuff. And so they tend to be a little bit longer winded of original posts than when you go look at like the Final Fantasy XIV main Reddit, which is the single largest one place for Final Fantasy XIV fans to be outside of just logging in game. It's an enormous community. And so this tends to be a little bit smaller, down at 21,000 members. And so it tends to be a little more discussion based. And every once in a while something pops up that I really like. I like it. And so here we are looking down the barrel of 2023. We are here in January of 2023. We are looking at possibly a new living season for Guild Wars 2. We're looking at a content roadmap being released for Final Fantasy XIV last February. Gave us an idea for what the roadmap is here. We do have a general idea of kind of when the patches will be throughout 2023. My guess is 6.4 comes in May, 6.5 in October. And so those are kind of my guesses. And then we have a roadmap for World of Warcraft as well, which is very atypical for them to put out something that official. Obviously, roadmaps are just big frameworks. It's not the full amount of content that'll be in a patch. They leave some things to be surprises. And so, like, you're getting a dungeon, but you don't know where the dungeon is. And you're getting story updates, but you don't know how much side story you're getting. And you don't know if there's any side features, updates to things in Final Fantasy like Golden Saucer and so on. Those tend to be the surprises that slide in, as opposed to the mainline items. Things like Deep Dungeon are announced well in advance. And so, the WoW stuff and the New World stuff, those are just frameworks. Hopefully they'll get well above and beyond those lists, but definitely nothing less than those lists. And so I wanted to talk about patch content cadence within Final Fantasy XIV. This isn't a complaint disguised as a question, I swear. In about 2 months, this was posted 2 days ago, we will have gotten the majority of Endwalker's content. We know that every expansion gets a point 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We will have completed receiving the point 3 cycle, leaving only the point 4, point 5, and their respective half patches. 0.55 is by far the largest half patch, all expansion, but it's still just 2 main patches, 2 sub patches. That's all that's left before we are sitting in 7.0 and going to level 100, which is a different topic. I've been thinking about how that's going to feel. Obviously, there will be a new Ultimate and Savage to prog. Good luck to everybody in Omega here on the 24th. And hopefully everybody will enjoy the 9 through 12 that will release in patch 6.4. Hopefully with another 1 to 2 week delay. And a new variant criterion that will hopefully have slightly better rewards. If I remember the roadmap correctly, it actually looks like we're getting a variant criterion both 6.4 and 6.5, bringing it to a total of 3 locations, I believe. I don't think I'm forgetting anything major besides maybe another Island Sanctuary update. We are getting another Island Sanctuary update. We will also see the relics hit their full maturation. As of right now, we've only seen the first step. The first step is usually pretty lackluster compared to the final step, for example. And so I would expect that system to mature a great deal. In this post, none of us have gone hands-on with the new dungeon. That hopefully is very, very, very rewarding. And then if they were ever to drop something like a surprise, Blue Mage was a surprise. As we went through Stormblood content today and we watched old videos from 2017 and 18, Blue Mage was a surprise that came out at FanFest and dropped within the expansion. And it was announced during, not the expansion that FanFest was hyping. It was a Stormblood FanFest about the upcoming Shadowbringers, and the Blue Mage was announced and then dropped inside of Stormblood. But as far as major things that are announced, we are just looking at mostly story extensions of the existing things. More Hildy, more Tataru, more, crafting, gathering, deliveries, all of those things, existing systems continuing to carry forward, maybe another PvP map for crystalline conflict, but it's all more of existing systems. So by the 0.3, we do have the general framework, and they have that correct. Now, I'm not bemoaning a lack of content. We know there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes that will take dev resources, like the graphics update, all the Trust Dungeon overhauls, which is to say, I'm understanding of there not being an exploratory zone content this time around in favor of Orthos, the Deep Dungeon. But ideally, we'd have both, like in Stormblood, which is what I hope for in 7.0. This has got me thinking about generally about what the total content I'd want from an expansion and other opinions on the subject. I would be hoping for, first of all, the usual. 12 raids, 0.0, 0.2, 0.4. Which also come in Savage form. You could argue for 5 Savage, since the last phase tends to feel like a totally other thing. 3 Alliance raids, dropped in the 0.1, 0.3, 0.5. 7 Extreme trials, because we get the first 2 trials on launch with their Extreme. The third trial on launch ends up being the 0.1 Extreme. And then we get a 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5, bringing us to a total of 7. 2 ultimates, which Yoshi P said he cannot promise, but they would like to target, which ideally would be 0.1 and 0.3. There's no reason to release one in 0.5, because that's when the combat system is kind of on its way out. And so that's the best place for those to fit, in my opinion. 5 leveling dungeons. That is at levels 91, 93, 95, 97, and 99. And then 8 level cap dungeons. That's our initial level 90 dungeon, as well as probably 2 others on launch, and then 1 with every patch. 1 with 0.1, 1 with 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, and 0.5, for a total of 8 level cap dungeons. So I'm following so far. At least 2 exploratory zones as early as possible with an attached borrowed power system and a relic that can be completed inside but advanced outside as well. Similar to the Eureka Bosja systems, right? And so we had Eureka, which had a couple of zones, and then we had Bosja, which of course did extend into Zadnor. Deep Dungeon as early as possible. I believe Deep Dungeons typically fit, in my opinion, they fit very well around the 0.3. Everybody's long since done with story, so you don't want it in 0.0 because there's so much to do. So there's no reason to like encourage people to rush. Take your time, go through everything. You don't need it in the 0.1 because the 0.1's our first casual patch, and so you've got brand new Alliance raid. In my opinion, I would love to see the relics start really, really early. Relics do not have a consistent starting time. So you don't need it in 0.1 because that's our first content patch. So for a lot of casual players, 0.1 is about taking on the things you're really excited about in 0.1 and then getting back to clearing all the crap you haven't cleared from 0.0. People leveling other jobs they haven't leveled. At that point, you start talking about crafting, gathering, tribal quests, all these things. You know, hunt trains are still relatively fresh for a lot of people that maybe didn't go into doing them right away. If there's an ultimate paired with that. And so like I think it fits really well in the 0.3 when there is just no fuel left on the fire from 0.0 for any players that have been playing the whole time. Okay, so I'm with that. But as early as possible, in my opinion, is the 0.3. It's the halfway mark. And that means that the first half you're focused on that. Second half, Deep Dungeon ends up being that kind of single player exploration that reinvigorates that drive. And then miscellaneous stuff like blue updates, which we believe we are getting this expansion. And then Island Sanctuary, which Yoshi P said he does expect to update beyond the 6.0 expansion. Keep in mind, PvP is something they do seem to want to carry forward as well. And so miscellaneous stuff would extend to Golden Saucer, anything like jump puzzles, all sorts of side quests, Jataru's Grand Endeavor, the Omicron, like little Omega, little dude you walk around with, Hildy. Miscellaneous actually starts to encompass a very large amount of content that there's probably very few players that consume all of it. Treasure maps is an enormous piece of content that is updated throughout this. Custom deliveries, crafting relics. Do we get to rebuild another city? I think there's some people maybe interested in rebuilding a little place called Garlemald. And so there's a lot in there. That miscellaneous stuff is very, very, very big and could spread across every single patch. like this miscellaneous category could be expanded to be honestly the amount of content that most new MMOs would be lucky to put out just on their own, much less the fact that these mainline ones, you are talking about this getting always record amounts of quest written, record amounts of voice acting, record amounts of cutscene playtime, record amounts of total story presented in an expansion. Like all of these things that are written in the first 4 bullet points are already enormous, and it does not include a lot of other things that are staples within what we would expect from an expansion. So what they're saying is, I would hope for, and everything here is generally following the pattern of recent years and what it is trended towards. Fair. I can personally take or leave Criterion variant content depending on its resource cost, but that's a whole different discussion. And it would be weird as a 1 expansion thing, so I'd expect 1 or 2. Laying out that seems like at max you could possibly ask for. What do you think? Well, I think we're getting 3 in the first one, so I would expect 3, and I would tie those to either odds or evens. And so if Savage is on the evens, and we don't always get an ultimate, I would put it on the odds to counterbalance alliance raids. It's also a great chance to dive in on kind of some fun story beats there. That also tunes it to where you can tune it hard to gear, because the catch-up gear drops the same time as Criterion. Since they've chosen for Criterion not to be a source of power, that ties Criterion to the patches in which power is being more freely distributed anyway, and everybody's coming off an even-numbered patch, so the hardcore players all have an incredible best-in-slot day and date when Criterion launches. And so I think that's where I would put them long term, and just leave those there. I'd love to see the variant Criterion start to maybe take on a little bit of Unreal vibes and go back and reimagine old dungeons, just because I run dungeons and all the time I'm like, man, I wish there was a harder mode of this. This is so fun, but it'd be more fun if it punched back, if I could actually like die easily. Having done some Mythic Plus in Dragonflight, and you can die for effectively just overpulling a little too much, or being a little bit undergeared and all those things, and while 14 can kill you, it doesn't feel like failure is this big ominous thing, and I want there to be an optional way, in addition to the standard ways to explore dungeons with trusts and normal, to explore those. So that way, maybe double pulls aren't a good idea. That'd be really neat. So that's just a personal wish there. But they're saying I could personally leave that, and that's because that doesn't appeal to them. They also didn't name a lot of the things I named, and a lot of things I'm forgetting. There's all sorts of stuff like updates to housing, and then GPOs, and the various like UI update things that make all sorts of gameplay more possible. The extensions of the adventure plate system. People who are into the various tribal quests, those get updated throughout, as far as we get new tribes pretty regularly. There are a lot of things not named here, but what do you think? And so, first of all, this talks about content cadence versus content amount. And the content cadence has undergone a change. And so let's first go back and look through the cadence. All right, so we're here in the cadence. So if we go look at regularity, in A Realm Reborn, we were looking at roughly 110 days per patch cycle. That's a 0.0 to a 0.1, a 0.1 to a 0.2, keeping in mind that we do have a half patch in between that kind of slow releases the rest of what should have been in the 0.0. That way you feel like you can take on the 0.0 at the 0.0 and the 0.5 at the 0.5. So it actually kind of gives us something to look forward to all the time, and we never feel like we're having too much crammed in our face. So the half patches tend to be this smaller release stuff. You've done all the story, you've done all the raids, you've got those all well in hand. Why don't you start working on the relics? That sort of concept. Heaven's Word actually slowed that down a little bit. We looked at that kind of 110, 120 day cadence. And then as we moved into Stormblood, Stormblood is where it got really interesting. So let's go take a look at patches here. And so what I've done here on the left is these are Final Fantasy XIV patches, and we have light gray lines being the main patches. We have the in-between patches being tracked in white, and then dark means that it is an expansion. And so I've got some columns here tracking. And so where A Realm Reborn, the patch gap, the distance between that patch and the thing before it, was 103, 103, 112, 84. It had a little bit of variance. And as we moved into Heaven's Word, it went to 144 out of the gate, 3.1 being a little slow, and then 105, 105, 112, 112, and then here's where something interesting happens in Stormblood. It's 117, 112, 112, 119, 112. And this starts to run a lot closer to a Swiss train schedule, where it is unbelievably predictable. And when you look at the amount of content that we got in Stormblood, when you look at the amount of voice acting we got in Stormblood, when you look at the amount of zones and in system investments and all of these things in Stormblood, and the fact that they were on the back end building Shadowbringers, which was incredible. And introduced all sorts of systems such as trusts and all this that were just on top of this. So in an interview with us, 4.4 actually was when they introduced a overhaul to the Chocobo system on the back end that did not affect the way players played with their Chocobo, but seemingly seemed to make sense that it made way for the trust to use some of that AI a little bit differently. So there was all sorts of stuff going on the back end, and yet every patch that entire schedule was within 1 week of the same distance. Didn't matter if there was a winter holiday, a summer holiday, a storm. Didn't matter if they had particular team members that had to miss days because they were sick or took vacation. The end product, as a result of the team as a whole, came out on time every time. So as we look at Shadowbringers, patch cadence, we have 118, 117. Then, of course, everybody goes inside for about a year because we all decided that outside was dangerous. So we slow down to a 182, not entirely their fault. March of 2020 was a crazy time. And then we go back to 112 and 126. And then at Endwalker, Yoshi says in February, we're going to be slowing down that word. The cadence, the amount of time between patches. There's been a little bit of flex over the years. We'd like it to be consistent. We want it to be exactly 4 months, and we want to build in the fact that people typically take vacation in the summer and in the winter by putting a week in each of those. It's one week around New Year's and 1 week mid-year over that kind of summer holiday. And so we know that there's extra weeks in there, so we should expect every patch to basically be on time, with the exception of 1 week. And so we look 130 to patch 6.1, 133 to patch 6.2, and then we add our week, which puts us back at 140, which is why I'm predicting that we'll go 133, and then we'll go 140 again, assuming that this means that they can be way more consistent in that cadence, taking the good part of Stormblood and making it sustainable. We've slowed down the pace so that we can maintain that cruise control mentality, and you as a player can predict, when do you want to play other games? When do you feel like you need to rush and complete this because you want to be able to play the new patch on time, but you've been away for a while? How many weeks should you expect a raid to be cleared so that you feel like you're staying kind of caught up with the other things you want to do? Where's the best time to play other games? It just allows you to better predict when do you want to take time away from other hobbies or away from work or whatever you do to make time for this game, and when is that not as urgent? But by them being consistent, it means that I can make my inconsistent life feel like Final Fantasy. I know where it fits. I know where it belongs, because I'm never like, okay, well, I don't know where to put 14. Well, how much is coming out? I don't know. When is it coming out? I don't know. And so we have these very predictable patch cadences, and it feels good because I always know how long do I have to wait for the next piece of content to arrive. That's great. So I think the cadence is not actually really discussed here. The cadence has been fine, and I think largely people are happy. You have, in theory, happy devs. I don't know. I'm not one of the devs. But in general, you also seem to have fairly happy players, and I see a lot of players making time for other games. I see players who said they'd never play Dragonflight playing Dragonflight. I see people playing all sorts of other games, both in and outside the genre. I see people taking breaks from the game, and you can see this as these people that are like, wow, 14's really dying as the directory drops off. Of course it drops off. It's mid-cycle. Why don't you check back in on the 24th with the launch of Omega Ultimate? Let's see if it really drops off. It's a healthy thing. And yes, this kind of relentless, we have to be breaking our record every single day, that all the marketing incentivizes that anytime a player base drops off, it's a dead game, it's a failed game, that anytime that's the case, this goes against that. You're telling people to take breaks, and you're showing them where to take breaks. How come they don't do Twitch campaigns? How come they don't do more marketing pushes? Because their marketing pushes and Twitch campaigns and all those things are likely geared at the times when there will be content. So actually, this post for having cadence in the title isn't about cadence at all. And I think that's because they've largely solved it for now. There is a lot of confidence. Go out, try the other games. I'm not worried. You'll be back. As Yoshi P said when he talked about the profit center that his division is for Square Enix, none of the other divisions are what we're doing, what we're doing. And if they could, in his words, I'd like to see them try. There's a confidence there that almost verges on arrogance, but it comes from being earned. It comes from a decade of doing the right things and getting the right results consistently, time and time again. It's not about who cares more for their game. It's not about who has the better community team. It's not about any of these things. Those things are great. But it's about the results. It's ultimately about some really boring spreadsheet that proves they are unbelievably consistent, relentless. That kind of armor, that plating of the resilience of knowing there's another patch right around the corner and another patch right around the corner. And we know what's in it, and we know that content will be at a guaranteed quality level. And we know that time and time again is what gives us the good game armor to make it through when a class accidentally isn't as balanced as we'd hoped. That makes it through when something tied to Square Enix sparks up drama. Does that hurt 14? No. And that means that gives them the ability to weather the storm. It would be better if there never were storms. And some storms that some companies have run into are very, very, very large storms. But that idea of good game armor gives them the ability to resist that. So, talking for the quantity is really what this post is talking about. And what they're hoping for is they're hoping for something that appeals. They're hoping for something that draws them in. And so this post, in my opinion, is starting to say, I'm not complaining, but I'm starting to feel like I'm not surprised. They admit there is a lot of content. But what else? What else? And this is the downside of regularity and being predictable, is there's no spice. If World of Warcraft Dragonflight is good, people are shocked. And if 10.0.5 drops on time on January 24th and has everything they said it would, people are going to be excited. And when New World drops content, it's always new, because the game's less than 2 years old. Whoa! New classes! I didn't even know they could do that. And yet, didn't even make this list. We'll probably get 2 new classes. One will be a DPS. Let's guess the other one's a tank. Maybe we drop to 1. We're probably getting a new class. We're probably getting female Rothgar. But it's not exciting, because they said we would get stuff like that, and then we did. So what I think what they're arguing for is, what is your ideal number of surprises? What is your ideal number of risks? Exploratory content were risks. This player liked them, so they'd like more of them. But there were lots of people that didn't like them, that disengaged from Eureka and were incredibly frustrated that so much time and resources and what they planned to do with the time between patches was tied to a piece of content they didn't enjoy. Eureka was not universally beloved on launch. It's great that it is matured into something that people still enjoy to this day, but it was not universally enjoyed. And not everybody feels that Bosge's Adnor improved on, iterated on, or took risks over Eureka. Some people believe that the Eureka system is better than the Bosge's Adnor system. It took a decline. Yoshi cut Deep Dungeon from, there was no Deep Dungeon within an expansion, because he thought, we have 2 Deep Dungeons, people, do they really want more? And he said he was shocked at how much feedback he got. So my counterpoint to this discussion post is, where are you willing to take risks? Because the problem with risks is that they don't always land. It's easy to say, I want new surprises that are good, but are you willing? Are you ready, willing, and able to accept patches that have a substantial amount of development resources put into content that doesn't work on launch, that isn't your taste, maybe isn't anybody's taste, that just isn't good? So for me, I think you keep a general framework. That gives us something to look forward to regardless. It's your safety school. No matter what, in 2 months, I will get something that I like. It may not be an immense amount of content, but it's something for me to justify playing 1 to 2 times a week consistently over a 2-month period until I get another patch that hopefully is a little denser for me. And that ideally means that there is something across all sorts of players, casual to hardcore in every definition, Crafters, gatherers, RP, PvE, PvP, raiding, dungeons, whatever. A little bit of content across a wide variety of types so that everybody gets 1, 2, maybe 3 things they like and recognizes that their friends are like, well, I don't like maps, but my friends really do. Right? So hopefully they can release a little bit of content. That's important because that gives us a reason for those of us that know that some patches will be more up our alley than others to stay subscribed, which means we know that they are making it worth it to get our money. I'm not just giving my money to them. I'm getting something in return and it's worth it. And I don't have to worry about it. I don't have to feel guilty about unsubscribing. I willingly, knowingly, and openly stay subscribed to the game and give them my money, which develops the next patch. And I don't have to say, do I give them my money to support the next patch even though I'm not going to play? I don't have to do that. Let's give a baseline. And then after that, I would love to see a couple of minor risks each expansion. That's things like the new escort system in quests, various UI updates, the Tataru's Grand Endeavor, where they feel really avoidable. I have no idea what they cost on the developer expense side. That's their balance sheet to take care of. But something that feels really, really avoidable. And I'd like a couple of those. Maybe 1 per patch, but at least 3 over the course of the expansion. I don't know what they are. Take a risk. Adventure plate, who knew we wanted that? Glad we got it. Take a risk. And then I would like, across the course of an expansion, 1 to 2 major risks. Blue Mage, major risk. Eureka Bosja, major risk. So I don't know what those look like. Criterion, major risk. Something that feels like a drastically new system that looks like it's meant to take a ton of investment that ideally, if we like it, will be the basis of something that they can support much cheaper than the initial entry. I assume the first variant Criterion dungeons were very expensive to build, test, and deploy. But I would think that hopefully they did it in a way where, like Unreal or anything else that they've introduced over the years, as soon as you've got a couple working, adding a new Crystalline Conflict map is not as expensive as building the first Crystalline Conflict maps. We've gotten these systems. Unreal is new. Moogle tomestones are relatively young. So I think, like, the risks are there. We would just need to go back and track them. And what I feel like is kind of 3 minors and 2 majors spread across the expansion. Maybe they're stacked up, maybe they're not. But that's where I'd like to see them be. I don't think that the game needs to take a major pivot. I don't. I think it's in a really healthy place. And I love that it's somewhere healthy and home that I can return to. But that's what I think this is. I think my ideal content cadence and amount of content in an expansion is to have a predictable cadence. I don't care what it is. 2 months, 6 months, I don't care. Just tell me when the content's coming. I love that it is this predictable, and it seems like they have tried to match Stormblood's predictability with an element of sustainability internally. So I think we're really good there. And I think for quantity, I think we've been doing great on the quantity. But the question is, how much of it surprises us? How much of it comes out and, like Island Sanctuary, makes people go, oh my god! And I want a couple of those things throughout the expansion. I can't wait for that thing. I think people were excited about the UI updates. I think they were. And those are those little minor risks. Shouldn't take a lot. That could be things like introducing chat bubbles, a new race. And I'm not necessarily talking about minor versus major from an expense standpoint. I'm saying minor in that if they're not for you, they're very easy to avoid, versus major, where it felt like if you didn't engage in Eureka Bosja at all, either of those systems, you felt like something actually was taken away. So minor risk, something like fishing raids. It's easy to avoid. Probably pretty expensive to put in the game, but it was easy to avoid. Ishgardian Restoration, major risk, very hard to avoid. I'm continuing to try to name different systems in each of my examples to remind you, this is what they've been doing. They take risks. But because so much of our opinion of the game is shaped to these reliable, steadfast, and true, kind of home-cooked meals, that favorite thing your mother or your father cooked for you that just makes you feel like home, because they're known for that, it's easy to forget how many times they really have surprised and delighted us. And things like the graphics overhaul and duty support and trusts do that. Things like the shared fate system do that. Quest sync, it does that. I think the job quests versus the role quests, obviously we felt like we lost something, but it made it very sustainable for them. We've gotten a lot of great things over the years, and in order for that to continue, I would like there to be a mix between reliable and not, but mostly reliable for me. That's my personal opinion on it. I'd love to know yours. Maybe you want more risks. Maybe you want more of the kind of the minor ones, easy to avoid, things like UI themes, things like new additions to Golden Saucer, expansions on the Chocobo racing system, the new Leap of Faith, maybe the snowboarding thing he's talked about, or maybe you want more major risks. Maybe you really do. Let's do more summoner overhauls. Let's add more ultimates per expansion. Let's add another fight to each Savage tier. Let's do something substantially expensive so that people feel like they really have to engage in it, to give it a shot. But let me know.